Happy midday to all you true believers out there joining us from all points around Texas and beyond. We're in the middle of spring weather here in Austin, Texas. We're keeping it weird. And most importantly, we're working for the Texas Military Department. We're not just keeping it weird here at Camp Mabry, we're keeping it real with this episode 7 of Operation Warp Drive, a study and discussion of writing as both a practical professional application and professional growth. I will first introduce the host and leader of this writing extravaganza, Colonel Hildebrand. It's been a while. Sorry I wasn't on last week. We also have a special guest with us today, Dr. Trent Lithgow, to our, welcome to our Warp Drive 7 experience. You are an associate professor at the Command and General Staff College. Your work explores political theory and ethics, and you're particularly passionate about professional writing, correct?
Yes, all true.
Well, we're excited to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Lithgow, thanks for joining us. So, I'll give a quick overview for Operation Warp Drive, but basically this is the 36th Infantry Division's charter for getting after some writing. So WARP is an acronym for Writing for the Army and Renewal of the Profession. We know that there are some gaps right now in doctrine, and we want to kind of close those gaps between the practitioners out in the field and the theorists who write those doctrine. So I'm really excited to hear your take on some of these ideas for editing and peer review, considering also that you're a part of the establishment. You deal with students all the time, so it's pretty exciting to have you on the show. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about writing, which is something I love to do and love to talk about.
Yeah, excellent. All right, Chief, I think we're going to kick it off by looking at some techniques for editing a document, right?
Yes, sir.
Right on. All right.
Yes,
so, Dr. Lithgow, I'm sure you give out a lot of papers every semester or every class cycle, and you get various degrees of perfection that comes back, right? So, as you kind of look at these papers, and can you tell the difference? And I'm pretty sure you can, but maybe explain how you see the difference between a paper that's kind of been well edited and maybe one that's not even kind of been looked at by a buddy, like on a scale, like how you look at those things on a spectrum.
Yeah, I can definitely tell. And I can even tell at which stage of, how you've laid it out here. I use slightly different words, but I can tell at which stage that the writer stopped. So if you write a first draft and that becomes your last draft, that's painfully evident when I read the paper, right?
Yeah,
painfully so. But why would, and I think we all know that, but why would students turn in something like that, or why would a writer turn in something like that? Well, because when you get done with that first draft and you immediately reread it, it actually seems pretty good, right? You feel pretty good about putting that last period in place, and you give yourself a high five and you read over it and you're like, yeah, this is fine. But the problem is that when you reread that draft and it's fresh in your mind, your mind fills in the gaps. So you know what you intend to say, and your brain does too. And so if there's a gap in there, it puts it in there. So we can't read it immediately after we draft it like our reader's going to see it. Yeah. There's a really cool cognitive test that you can do. If you take all the vowels out of a word, or here's a better one, find a passage, and you can look these up on the internet, and scramble all the words or all the letters in each word except for the first letter and the last letter, and you'll be able to read it fine. Because our brain doesn't read every little thing. It reads in patterns. It looks for cues. So it'll look at the first and the last letter of the word and fill in the blanks. The same phenomenon happens with that first draft. So it sounds great, but if you rest it a couple of days or a week and you come back to it, you'll be like, ooh, well, this was terrible. This is way worse than it felt like when I wrote it. As you progress through the rewriting process after the first draft, the early rewrites will show a lot of improvement in structure and kind of the arguments and the spine, the organization, but they'll still be pretty wordy, a little bit muddy and unclear. So really kind of the breaking point between unsatisfactory and satisfactory writing is coming back to it that first time and doing a couple of revisions, really focused on the content, the structure, the big ideas. The break point between acceptable writing and excellent writing is a further series of edits. And we're moving from left to right on the slide as we're looking at it. And that's when you start looking at sentences, words, simplifying the writing, making it more concise. And of course, the last thing, which is making the grammar, punctuation, mechanics, so as the writing moves from sort of vague and ill structured to very clear and precise, you can definitely see where the rewriting process either made it through all the way or maybe stopped.
Yeah, that's good. So, and this is excellent because in my mind, you mentioned some things that I'm going to latch on to, like breaking points. And these are not like things that, like, when I say Jared has pushed me to the breaking point, that's not what I'm talking about.
It's completely
when I'm
different.
talking about yeah, that's right. It is completely different. But like, there's certain transitional periods that can only really happen if you leave time. I think what you're talking about when you said, hey, the mind fills in the gaps, that's, I think the technical term for that is like heuristics, right? Like, our mind it has those automated systems that it does already to kind of figure things out, because we are biased, and our biases, it's important that we have these biases because that's how we get work done, but it's also biases in extreme can take us in a way that we don't want to. And so we got to mitigate those things. And so I like this idea of having these breaking points. And when the audience sees these slides, we talk about different aspects of grammar and syntax style. Have you seen, or do you have any tips for, like, and maybe this kind of goes into TJ's court too, because he's working on some PhD level stuff, but like content, like, hey, you're talking about this idea, but I don't think you keep saying this, but I don't think you realize what you're saying, kind of thing. Like, have you seen people kind of stray on content, and you had to, like, how do you bring somebody back when you're the editor? How do you bring somebody back in on content without destroying their original thought, or without, course correcting them to your ideas instead of letting them have their own?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two related issues there. Number one, how do you make sure that all the content or the piece as a whole is sort of working toward the same end? I use the word coherence. And coherence is the idea that there's a main point, there's a big idea with this thing, and everything that you read is advancing that and working toward it, and it's not going off on tangents. So I think that happens very early in the revision process. When you draft, it's very common to sort of go off, and put a lot of stuff in there that maybe isn't directly related to what you're talking about, or maybe provides a little too much detail. So there's an expression called "murder your darlings" that writers use, and this comes from an early 20th century English professor. And the idea is that during drafting, you're going to write some stuff that you maybe tend to fall in love with a little bit because you worked hard on it, right? But then when you go back and do that first revision, you're going to see, like, this paragraph, I worked really hard on this thing, but it does not advance my main point at all.
Yeah.
And so I got to get rid of it. I got to murder it. And instead of saying just cut the clutter, we say murder your darlings, because it's hard. To get rid of drafting that you worked hard on, but it's absolutely necessary. So that happens very early, and murdering your darlings means going through that in those early after the first draft, and making sure that every passage advances the main point. Later on, when we're talking about more stylistic editing, and you're providing peer review, that's really a little bit kind of a tougher skill. One of the things that you have to remember is, especially is if you're giving peer editing or like line and like style editing, as you have it here, is that if you're the editor, not the writer. And I have an editor friend, her name's Ellen Toner. She's wonderful. And she says that she's an editor. She says the best editors are invisible. And so you should be invisible in the final work. It's tempting to give the writer advice on the way you would do it. But what you want, you can't make it your article, even if you think you would write it better. What you are trying to do in stylistic editing is help the writer make the article the best version of itself, but it's still got to be true to the writer's, vision. So that takes a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of give and take, and a lot more kind of suggesting and kind of working with the writer.
Yeah. Hey, TJ, have you murdered any of the darlings in your PhD dissertation yet?
I absolutely have. It was eye-opening whenever I got to the dissertation phase, and I was sitting in a cohort environment on something similar to this, and they were like, if you only have like 5 to 10 pages in your chapter 2, then you should be concerned. And I was like, well, I am concerned because I only had 5. But the 5 I had, I was really tied to because it took me a while to get those. So it was hard. It was kind of like one of the previous sessions we had when we talked about just when people critique, right? Anytime that you spend in your life applying yourself to something that's meaningful and you have to like erase that, it kind of hurts, right? It does, because you've spent that time in your life trying to really emphasize a point, and then you realize that it's not getting the point across that you want. So then you have to find another way, and the other side of murdering is getting rid of the fluff. Like I don't need a sentence that says something mundane. If I'm trying to get a point across, I need to keep trying to get the point across every opportunity I have.
Yeah. And then I'm sure, Mariah, you've dealt with, oftentimes as the legal advisor to an investigating officer, you find yourself in that editor role where, maybe you're offering up those darlings on the sacrificial altar.
You guys will call me a serial killer because
yeah.
But yes, I'm constantly having to edit. But in my position, it's unique too, because I can give them from a legal standpoint, like, hey, here's the legal references and the authorities you should be looking at. Did you make the right decision? Let's talk about it. And a lot of times after we discuss, they do have a different reasoning, and they may change what they have in their writing because substantively, maybe I disagree from a lawyer standpoint, but I also tell them, hey, ultimately it's your choice. I just want to give you some data that maybe you hadn't thought about. And so sometimes, I encourage them to maybe rethink it, but I'm never going to tell them they should change it because that would be wrong.
Yeah.
But I do a lot of the grammar and the, that kind of stuff, structural editing ahead of time, because nobody reads 2550, the Army regulation, when I'm doing these Army investigations. So unfortunately I have to, and my paralegals are kind of like my right hand. They admittedly, some of my stuff is jacked up and I send it to them and they just work their magic, and that's why I love them so much. But so I have it's a little bit of both, which is, I kind of sometimes don't want their writing style to shine through, but I have some good IOs too. I always am like crapping on the bad ones, but I've seen like a lot of really good ones too. So I should just put that out there.
Yeah. What do you say, Lightsy?
I was struck by one of the first comments. The way you have this even designed this way, sir, the multiple levels that you that first draft, and you're internalizing it so much that when you go back and reread it with a separation of time, did I really write that down? Did I really mean that? It just doesn't make any sense sometimes. And in my business, on the bandmaster side of the house, you work this and you start to hear things in your head that aren't actually there. And you have to step back and have somebody else get up, and then you're not actively involved and you can fix it. It's the same thing. You're editing, trying to get to that next layer of fixing something, but you can't do it sometimes as the active participant. It's very much, I've got to the point where if I write something, I have somebody else read it out loud to me. If it's something important, read it out loud to me, because I'll hear it. Did did it come across to me the way I wanted it to come across? Is the meaning coming out? And man, that I can't believe I even wrote that in sections. You know.
Yeah.
So
That's true. And I think Jared can relate to this, because I think Mariah brought up an interesting point. In different roles and functions that we have, like in my job as chief of staff, I'm going to get work from my people and I'm going to edit it. And it's, I've always maintained that I don't want to ever take away the identity of somebody in their product. Like they did the hard work for this, especially when you're talking some type of course of action brief. And just because I have a predilection that will probably take it from 90% to 110% on the product, like I probably won't offer it up, because I want them to have the sense of accomplishment that they've done something. But in other times when I know it's depending upon the audience, that this is maybe going from a senior leader or a political, one of our political leaders, right? It's got to be highly polished. And so some of that kind of goes out the window. So Jared, you and I have had some of those interplays back and forth. Like you've been the receiver of some of my harsh edits.
Well, it's funny. I'm looking at the flow and how it is. And normally, right, I get some of the structural editing, and then me, right, I'm not, right, no PhD. I don't have the, the education like a lot of other people do. I would end up jumping to the copy and editing, and then I'm swimming upstream. And that's something right, that was ingrained in me in high school. You have to get grammar, you have to get this before you do anything else right. And so then you get, right, by the time I get to line editing, I'm done. I'm not even going to look at style editing. I'm wiping my hands and walking away. And something I've learned, right, working a lot with Colonel Hildebrand on this mission is, it is getting, the first and second one are the most important ones to get done, to get it to, the people who know how to polish it. And that's that line editing and copy editing, getting it to them and letting them take it that other 10, 20, 30%. Probably for me, it's probably like 60%, but getting it along the lines of that. And this makes a lot more sense of why my writing, even working here, has improved substantially in the last several months, because I never really did anything on the really focusing on structure or style. I went all the way straight to the end of, oh no, my grammar isn't right. It's underlined in blue. I need to go change this. Word
Jared,
said
you
it
don't
was
think
wrong.
in complete sentences?
No, I
think in
don't.
complete sentences?
I don't think in complete sentences. No, not at all.
Oh, well, sorry. I guess you're an aberration. No, just kidding. But hey, this is an excellent discussion, Big. I think audience has a play in some of the roles we have as editor and or originator of these ideas and products that we create. So in Dr. Lithgow's case, he's got his students, and there's got to be a very definitive line between editor and originator, right? But in the workplace where you're collaborating, there's not so much that line between authorship and editorship. It's like we're all in the same boat. And so you got to be able to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's writing is definitely a team sport. And one of the things that we're trying to do here at the Command and General Staff College is trying to think of ways that we can make the writing more collaborative, rather than sending students off, for academic reasons and assessment reasons, like, hey, do all the writing on your own, and then we'll just tell you at the end if it's good or not. That's not helpful, right?
Yeah.
So the most helpful thing to do, and the best way to learn to write, is to get feedback during the process, at each stage of the process. So I actually introduced a course this year called Professional Writing Made Simple. And that's what we do. So rather than turning in a paper at the end, my students turn in a draft, and then they turn in a revised draft, and then they turn in an edited draft, and they get full credit for each of those as if it was a complete paper. But I don't focus on the product, which, Mariah mentioned 2550, and far be it from me to criticize 2550, but I will a little bit. It's very product focused, right? So it gives you a checklist of what good writing looks like, or what Army writing should look like, which is it's about 75% good. There's some issues that I have with it, but it's generally pretty good advice. The problem is that it doesn't tell you how to get there. It says nothing about the process. And the key to writing well is improving the process, right? Understanding what goes on in each of these steps, and then improving the process. So if you can learn the process, you can use it to write whatever product that you need to produce at any time. And so we're trying to really shift our focus from a product focus to a process focus. And we've been doing that gradually over the last couple of years. We've got some really good feedback and results from our students. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, that's good. I like that idea of focusing on the process. And that's, I mean, for people in the audience, that's really what this is about too, because we're trying to give them insights. We're trying to show them the way. You know, the people out in the audience, they're at various stages in this whole process. Some may be working on their final draft. Some may be, you know, I hadn't even got the idea on paper yet. But in the event that they need to go back and look at these things, they have the idea of where I can fit where I fit into the process, where I'm at now, and they can go in, they can figure stuff out. So I kind of have a very pedantic question for you, Doctor. So sometimes I see books, all right, and it's like it's a anthology, right? And it has a lot of different pieces in there, and it says edited by ... John Smith, whatever. So when you see something called out on the front cover of a book and it says edited by, does that mean those guys have those editors have a more pronounced hand in some of the content, or is it more how they're arraying the anthology for like the flow of one piece to the next?
Yeah, so it's the when you see an edited volume, it's beyond copy editing. Almost every book, unless it's self-published, has a copy editor, right? But you don't see them displayed prominently on the front. The difference is that in a regular book, the editor really isn't making any intellectual contribution to the work. They're just helping the writer, you know, with line and copy editing. When like I'm editing a book right now, an academic kind of volume compilation of the one you described, and so I'm putting a lot of you know, intellectual work in. I'm actually writing part of it, but a lot of it is getting the writers together and then sort of linking the themes of the different, you know, figuring out who we want to get in this book. I'm co-editing it, what we want them to write about, grouping those writings into kind of bins, and then helping the writers sort of speak to each other throughout the book so that the book isn't just a collection of disparate articles, but that it advances one big main idea and has a coherence to it despite being written by different people. Yeah. So when you see an edited by in those kinds of books, it's because the editor has done that extra work. And I actually am not line or copy editing. I've got a line and copy editor at Army University Press that's going to do that. So I'm just doing sort of the intellectual editing side.
Yeah, that's good. That's an important distinction. Excuse me. Especially for our audience.
This sounds a lot like when I build a PowerPoint slide here for DeVarty and Colonel Clifton just goes and puts his name at the bottom of it, takes all the credit for it.
Yeah, I think you still owe me another PowerPoint slide from today. So what you were talking about, Dr. Lithgow, with the editing and everything and putting it together, it goes back to your point that you started with, is writing is a team sport, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want, like a basketball analogy, you don't want 5 centers on the court at one time, because then they don't know how to advance the ball or whatever. But if you can tie everyone together, then it looks like, you know, it looks like a fast break when everyone's in unison and sync, and it flows, and it makes people want to read it because it's multiple people with ideas that flow together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, TJ, I think the sports analogy probably best used is the icing team, like those guys that go out in front and polish the ice to make, like, I see myself as the guy that polishes the ice for, you know, the people that are trying to write and get stuff done. So, yeah. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Rabbit hole.
Dr. Lithgow, I have a question. In a second. So in my other life, I was a high school principal, and I think I mentioned at some point perhaps that my mom was an English teacher. So as I found out pretty quick, my most high maintenance team that I had, since we're talking about teams, was my English department by a lot. And you know, oftentimes I, you know, have a day with them and have a discussion later with the old pro, which my mom was. So I felt like so. But some of it is writing. Writing begets writing,
Mhm.
in the sense that the more you write, the better you get, the more familiar you get in that piece. And I know you're teaching this, but you focused again on process. Second to go with your new course. So I think Sergeant Major just got off of here, but for a lot of these Army courses, like I edit some, I help him with some of his stuff, or some people, go back and forth. There's a sheer volume of writing with multiple people in our discussions on, is it AI that's actually grading it, and how much feedback are you actually getting for the growth process? You mentioned the process, which I'm a huge believer in, and but so much of what we do in the Army, whether it's senior warrant officer school where you're writing these things, or Sergeant Major's Academy or whatever, is sort of feels like it goes with volume, but not necessarily feedback.
Yeah.
Specific on growth.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I won't speak for the professional military education system writ large, although I think that what I'm about to say about the CGSC is generalizable to that broader universe. That, yeah, we focus too much on volume, quantity, and not enough on quality. And we kind of create some kind of perverse incentives. And I run a Substack, and I wrote about this. And this is kind of a PME problem, so I won't bore the audience too much with it, but it goes like this. We give our students in PME a lot of writing assignments, but not or written assessments, but not writing assessments. So when you're writing in PME, often you're not writing, most of the time, you're not writing to assess your writing skills. You're writing to assess your leadership skills or your logistics knowledge or something else, right? And so when you look at those rubrics, what you have to do is get enough done that shows the instructor that you are proficient in whatever knowledge domain you're being tested on. But you have a lot to do because we cram as much as we can into professional military education. So you have 5 of these things to do. The part of the rubric that deals with like style and correctness and things like that is often weighted down because we don't want to tell someone, hey, you know what you need to know about logistics, but you really can't write, so you failed, right? We want the assessment to accurately measure logistics knowledge. Well, that's all those are good reasons. That all makes sense, right? But what it does is that collectively you put a lot of those assessments together, and the most efficient path through PME is producing a large volume of mediocre writing, right? That satisfies the requirement, but doesn't, the time that you take to go down into doing style and line editing doesn't pay off in a much higher score because that part of the rubric's only 5 or 10%. So when we see students come out of PME and we're like, hey, our students are really proficient at producing a high volume of mediocre work. Why is that? And people wonder about that question. I don't wonder at all. It's because we created the incentives for them to do that. So I think we have some work to do on the education side. Number one, of becoming more process focused and giving feedback during the process. And number two, shooting for more quality over quantity. Now at the CGSC, we're making that transformation next year. We're cutting the total curriculum hours by over 15%. And at the same time, we are shooting for a lot higher quality in terms of fewer assessments, but higher quality assessments. So I think the shift is underway, but I completely sympathize with someone who's experienced that in PME, and it's a problem.
And I just equate it to, again, business, but if you're practicing the mistakes over and over again to deal with specific content, you never really shore up. You don't learn the real way to do it, or your process doesn't improve, and it doesn't improve by sheer volume. Let alone you may have
practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent, right? So
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good practice makes perfect. So
exactly.
You've got to practice the right things the right way.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Dr. Lithgow, Major Cox. So, this is a primarily Compo 2 National Guard formation. So the majority of the students that come through CGSC go through the DL. ILE and AOC. It's a lot harder to do the, back and forth with your small group instructor, given the, the distance and time difference. And then there's the sheer number of students that they probably have oversight of. So what advice would you give to those DL students for how to maybe get in with instructors and get some of that feedback prior to having to submit a final draft to a paper?
That's really tough. I'll tell you that it's actually not terribly different in the resident course because, like I usually have between 50 and 64 students during the year. So the amount of feedback I'm able to give on each student is not, not terribly high. I think the advice probably for distance and non-distance resident students and for military students writ large is this probably needs to be something that you do in your personal development. So, we all know the Army's professional development model has 3 domains, the operational domain, on-the-job training, the institutional domain, which is education and training, and then the personal domain, which is what you choose to do on your own time. I don't think that even in the resident course, we give students enough actual writing instruction. It's 6 hours right now, so it's not a lot. They do a lot of writing here, but they actually don't get a lot of writing instruction. And not every instructor is great at feedback. Not every instructor is a good writer because a lot of them are, came from the Army. So I think the best path here, although PME can help you a little bit, is to make this something that's a personal development goal. And there's a ton of resources out there. One that I would point to that everybody can access is the Student Text 22-2, which is the Command and General Staff College Professional Writing Guide. Now, in 2022, there's some old versions of that. In 2022, we revised that completely. To give you an idea of the revisions, we took it from a product focus, something more like an expanded 25-50 to a process focus, and that's how it's organized. We brought in best practices from across the academia. So the previous version had 8 references. 6 of those were to DoD or Army or TRADOC sources, and the current version has about 70 or 80 scholarly and other sources that it draws on. And so it's a really good guide. It's very simply written. I would start there. Read that thing. It's pretty breezy. You can go through it fairly quickly, as you might expect for a writing guide, right? But it gets you well down the path of doing the kind of writing that we want you to do. And if I could, I just want to add on sort of another change we've made that I think is super important. And that is that we have largely stopped talking about academic writing here at the CGSC. I don't use that word, and I encourage nobody to use that word. We talk about professional writing. So we're a professional school, and our philosophy used to be that, well, you're coming back into an academic environment, so we need to give you enough academic writing skills we need to refresh your academic writing skills. No, that's not what we need to do. What you need is professional writing skills. And we should not be giving you anything, if we don't have to, that isn't applicable when you leave here. So that's our focus, is on writing professionally and in the profession. And so we've tried to eliminate as much as we can that line. Now, there are some academic things, some artifacts of writing in the academy, citations and things like that aren't as prominent or important in the professional world. But by and large, we're really focused on professional writing. So to tie that into your original question, if I'm a student and I'm trying to get better, or I'm looking at coming to CGSC and I want to succeed, I would start by looking at ST22-2, CGSC Professional Writing Guide, and then setting out for myself a program to improve my professional writing. And that's going to serve you well as a CGSC student. And it's more importantly, it's going to serve you well as a CGSC graduate.
Yeah. Hey, that's a great point, Doctor. I mean, you gotta have I think at the individual level, there has to be a conscious decision to say, what is my program of writing? And I say program, I mean that loosely, but basically you've got to create something for yourself to get after it. And it's kind of like what Chief Licey said, writing begets writing. So I know plenty of people that just keep a daily journal and they're like, I'm going to write 300 words today. And they just write 300 words. And sometimes they have a problem because they have writer's block. They don't know what to write about. And so they absolutely just write, mush, just stuff. But it's the process of getting stuff out. And then I would also contend, like me personally, where I get some of my best writing done is not even writing at all. It's I'm down here on the border. I do, it's 5 hours between one place and another, and I get constant windshield time, and I don't listen to the radio. I keep my phone available, and then when I'm thinking of problems that I have to deal with, I think of novel solutions. I think about how I'm going to write it, and then I basically turn on the microphone and I talk it into my phone and save the note, and then I get my writing done that way. But there's got to be, people have to make that independent, conscious decision to get after it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So let me just wrap up this content on this visual real quick before we move to the next one. So basically, you got 4 types of editing here. They kind of build and process 1 through 4. Structure editing, you're kind of getting to what the doctor talked about, like this content match. Is this paragraph appropriate? And you'll find, hey, look, my darlings tend to be like, I try to be very crafty in some of my words, like, hey, a turn of phrase or an idea. And sometimes if you try to make the idea fit, it's like having a stepchild in your paper. And it's like, hey, it doesn't work. It's a paragraph that doesn't exist inside these other paragraphs. So you have to take them out and you have to sacrifice those darlings. So I found myself doing that, making sure the thesis and main point line up. A quick way to do that is if you have a thesis and you have intro topic sentences for each paragraph, they should all be mutually supporting. So, and then your sentence length, right? I've seen this a lot. A lot of times I see this in some of the professional writing. I see when I look at OERs. I'm a senior rater now. I look at what the rater wrote. Hey, I had to kick this back because I'm like, Major Jones did X, Major Jones did Y, Major Jones did Z, Major Jones did 1. I was like, okay, let's weave in some pronouns here, right? Let's create a little flow and cadence, right? Like connect the ideas together, but also vary your sentence length, right? People don't want to read long sentences, right? If you have a complex sentence, break it in 2, right? Use punctuation appropriately to break it in 2. If a good technique for that is, if you think your sentence is too long, see if you can say it all in one breath when you read it aloud. And if you can't, then you have a problem, right? So those are some things about this slide. Team, anything else before we move to the next visual? Did I miss anything?
Hey, Colonel Hildebrand, I had a question for Dr. Lithgow.
Yeah.
So as a student here, living my best professional writing life in the Sergeant Major Academy, we're starting to transition to our final professional writing papers and capstones. So we have my classmates, we're doing peer reviews. So as it lines up with PME and we do these papers, what would be a good approach for those peer reviews or technique?
Yeah, so peer reviews are a great way to help you with your writing. The key that I found in peer reviews is that you need to be very specific with your peer reviewer about what kind of feedback you want. And that depends on where in the writing process you are at. I found that with Army writers, and I hate to keep going back to 2550, but Mariah mentioned it, and so I'm going to keep doing it. The idea that you always have to use active voice is probably the only writing rule that Army writers consistently follow. And it's not even actually, it's a good guideline, but it's not a very good for a rule. So if you don't give your peer reviewers, direction, what they'll end up doing is looking for active and passive voice. That's what I found with my students. All right. So the first thing to ask is like, where are you at in the writing process? Are you more over on structural editing, which I actually call revising? In other words, are you trying to figure out, like, is the idea of this paper clear? And do the major ideas below it support the idea? Are the topic sentences in each paragraph clear? Like, are you dealing with the big stuff? If so, then say, hey, don't worry about sentences and confusing words and grammar. I'm not there yet. Focus on my ideas, right? Maybe you're good with your ideas, but you're more in the middle of this slide where you're on editing. And so you're like, hey, look, I'm good with the ideas and the order in which I'm laid them out. The spine of my paper is good. But I'm now concerned with clarity. Do my sentences flow? Do I have concise, simple, concrete language that's easy to read and understand? So read this and tell me if it's easy to read and understand. Like, what's muddy? Where could I put a simpler word? And then if you're if you're more on the right and you're maybe a little, there's a lot of things that can help you with grammar. I mean, like Grammarly and things like that. AI can help you a lot with grammar. But if you're concerned about grammar, punctuation, things like that, and you're asking for those kind of peer reviews from, like, the English brain in your class, then you want to tell them that. So I think that's really the key, is to tell them precisely what kind of feedback that you want, so that they scope their feedback to something that's useful for you based on where you are in the process.
So you're saying the old way to do it, we'll laugh at this, of, hey, pass your paper, one person back. Okay, here's your lit review. Doesn't work anymore. Is that right?
Oh yeah, probably not.
Yeah, but so Sergeant Major, just so I understand your question too. So you guys, your next writing assignment is to do a peer review, or is this part of the process of the current writing assignment? Like, you don't have to, like, you're not doing like a book review of somebody's paper, or are you guys talking about process?
Yeah, we're just talking about process, and there's no structure in the academy for peer reviews. So in point in case, like, as I'm doing my capstone, I've had 3 different instructors for that capstone paper. So, getting any advice from somebody, seeking someone to, review your work, is something I think we really need there. So,
yeah. Well, there you go, man. That could be an NCOER bullet for you, brother. Stood up the first ever Sergeant Major Academy Peer Review Institute.
I think when people do peer review, you've got to. This goes back to our earlier conversation of, you want this paper to be you at the end, right? The best version of you and the paper that it can be. Don Murray, who's a great writing instructor who's passed on now, but he gives this advice. He says, when we do, in talking about peer review, when people give you critical feedback, you should consider it and be suspicious, but be suspicious. When people give you positive feedback, you should be even more suspicious. Treat all peer feedback as kind of a suggestion, and even electronic feedback as a suggestion. Like when I use Grammarly, one of the things I find, increasingly these sort of Grammarly style or AI powered writing engines, they'll make suggestions to you, particularly at like the line editing, styling, editing level, of something like, hey, here's how to rearrange the sentence to be shorter or clearer. What they really aren't getting is context. Like, how does that sentence fit with the one that came before it and the one that came after it? And so I accept its recommendations, I don't know, 70% of the time, but about 30% of the time I'm like, that's what you think. I'm going to go with what I think. And so, writing isn't about following rules. And I think that's a trap that many military writers fall into, which kind of goes back to our upbringing that Jared was talking about. Our English teacher pounded us over the head with follow the rules. Writing isn't about following rules. It's about making choices. And the process of rewriting, all editing, can really be summarized in reviewing the choices that you've made, asking, are they good ones? And if not, making better ones. Does this paragraph belong? Then if not, then I'm going to make the choice to get rid of it. Does this word work? If not, I'm going to make a better choice. Does this sentence work? Does its length work? If not, I'm going to make a better choice. I tell my students, even grammar rules, I call them conventions, because in my view, the purpose of grammar is just to make things clear. It's to help us communicate, to provide a common structure. So I only have one writing rule, and I'll give it to you. And it's easy to remember, ABC. Always be clear. Always make the clearest choice. So if writing is a series of choices, the way to know what the best choice is the clearest choice. The one that makes your meaning most apparent and easiest to grasp for your reader. So if you always be clear, I think you'll always be where you need to be with professional writing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wrote that rule down. That is definitely something we could institute at the staff level for sure. Hey, but Doctor, you touched on something I mean, it wouldn't be a session if we didn't talk about AI. So, I just want to point out, so I'm a big fan of Grammarly myself. I'm a big user of AI. Jared and I, we kind of stand at opposite ends of the spectrum on AI and how much we want to teach it, because it has to have that human in the loop. And I would make this point. When I look at Grammarly, if you notice on Grammarly, it never gives you an option that says, accept all suggestions. And there's a reason why there's not that button on there. Because even the developers of Grammarly know you have to have that human in the loop. And to your point, Doctor, it's about choices. I make the choice. Does this make sense or does it not make sense? Because there are times, like, let's say they're talking about various plans, and it talks about like deployment cycle, or it talks about random words that go together, and it's like, I would never use those words together. Why would I string those words together? Those words make no sense together. And then I know I'm gonna have to turn it over to Jared, because he's chomping at the bit to reply as well. So Jared, what do you got about AI?
No, yeah, I mean, and that's what it is. I think there's a lot of people just like Grammarly, right? Oh, it was a suggestion. I just accept it and I click through, just click, 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 click. But there's a lot that people don't look into it, right? Which AI model are they using? Are they using a very quick, give me the quickest answer model, or are they using one that has a little more logic that goes through and right? I look at it with, I think now O4 Mini High just came out with ChatGPT, right? That's my Colonel Hildebrand. That's going to take about, a minute to process before it even gives me an answer back. Where some of these other ones like, oh, no, here you go. I made you this. And exactly what you're talking about with that AI, when you're looking at that line editing and copy editing, right? I was thinking, right, it's that 11th grader that's beat down, that I have to do it this way because my English teacher told me to. And you read it and you're just like, it doesn't look right. Something, you don't know what it is, but it takes you back to those dark days of the English teacher back in high school. And you're like, that's why it doesn't make sense. And, really, what I've been learning a lot here is that difference of that, academia, or for me, I call it that high school writing versus that professional writing, of writing to write. And that's where more of your structure, right? And especially that style part of it, that you can say, oh, I know who wrote that because of the way that it flows, because of the way that it reads, because the way even they use their words in it. And AI can try to mock some of that, but it never really gets that. It doesn't quite pinpoint where that instinct of that human instinct.
Yeah. So here's my thought on AI. I don't think AI is going to replace writers, but I think writers who know how to use AI are going to replace writers who don't know how to use AI. So it's an amazing tool. We're, here at the CGSC, the class that's coming in this year is going to be the first class where we actually have a dedicated piece of the class just focused on learning AI and prompt engineering and those kinds of things. I think AI raises, I won't go into the ethical challenges other than to say, if you submit something to your boss or for publication that AI produced, that doesn't take the responsibility off of you. If your name's on it, you own it. So you have to keep that in mind, right? The challenge, AI presents a lot of challenges. Some of the best, Jared laid out a couple of them. AI on itself, its writing tends to be vague, wordy. I wrote an article about this on my Substack, and I think the challenge is that when in the past, to recognize bad writing, we use the heuristics that Colonel Hildebrand was talking about, right? And those heuristics were things like grammar errors, punctuation errors, right? And we could infer from those surface level problems that the deeper thinking behind the writing probably wasn't there. What AI has done is it's made that invisible. So AI can produce perfectly grammatically perfect writing that on the surface flows. As you read it, it looks like good writing. It even caters to our intuition that complex words, big words, create credibility. And that's a false intuition. And I'm happy to talk about why that is. So it creates the illusion of good writing. AI is excellent at it, right? Without human intervention. So the challenge is, first of all, recognizing when there's no there, when the writing looks good and all the surface level cues that we're used to identify bad writing are missing. They're not there, but yet the writing is bad because the substance is bad. So we have to learn to recognize that. Then number two, we have to learn how can we use AI to make our writing better and more efficient. And that's where really I think the opportunity lies, is that a lot of the sort of routine tasks that we did other ways, AI can help us with. The way I tend to use it for the most part is to bounce things off it. Instead of giving things to my wife and saying, hey, read this, I can just have AI read it. Say, hey, read this and give me suggestions. And much like a peer review, I'll tell it what kind of suggestions I want. I don't have it rewrite it. I say, give me a list of suggestions so that I can track what's going in and out of my writing. And there's different ways to do it, right? You can use AI in the research process. You can use it in the rewriting process. I tend to not use it a lot for drafting necessarily, because I find that editing an AI-produced draft is probably more work than me just drafting something and then editing it to get it the way I want it. But I think there are two techniques that I would recommend for writing with AI. Number one, from the substance side, is retrieval augmentation. So if you're not using any kind of retrieval augmentation, where you're either telling it to reference some files, where it's validating its substance and giving you citations or references as to where it got it so you can verify that the substance is good, you should definitely use retrieval augmentation. And then the second thing is customizing the model with custom instructions. So like in ChatGPT, for example, you can go in and click on your account icon, and there's a couple of windows there where you can input about 1,500 characters of custom instructions, which is essentially a prompt that the AI considers every time that it responds. So what does my prompt look like? It says, use simple words, be concise, use concrete language, put the bottom line up front, use right branching sentences. I'm happy to talk about what that is. And then the rest of it, I actually curate a list of AI cliches. And you've probably heard these, like things that AI loves to say, like, we're going to deep dive, or we're going to navigate the complex landscape of, like those really cringy phrases that AI uses. So I have a curated list of those. And at the top, I say, do not say these words or phrases or variations of them. And then I have a list of probably, 50 AI cliches that I tell ChatGPT not to use. And that helps the initial response to my prompts be a lot better. So that's kind of how I use the tool.
So have you given it a prompt to say, use only these cliches and write about work drive or whatever?
Yeah, I have. I actually, one time I told it to write a poem using only AI cliches. And I published it on LinkedIn. It's pretty bad. Pretty cringeworthy.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. So we have another visual for you, Doctor. This is kind of advanced editing techniques. And when you look at it, you'll see it's advanced because it looks complex, right? But it just kind of shows you how everything's kind of interconnected. And I think, as we look back on the conversation we had over the last 45 minutes, like what we've talked about demonstrates the complexity of what we're doing with our editing or our peer reviews.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot that happens here. And I think this visual kind of shows maybe how this appears to someone that's doesn't have a lot of experience with the writing process. So I think the question that this visual raises is, okay, like, how do you do this? You know, we've talked about a lot of things, techniques that you need to get done. So let me suggest a way to sort of organize these writing activities into bins. And I think it follows well with what was on the previous slide. I bin everything that happens under the first draft under the bin of rewriting. And I always say that, you know, if I could give my writing philosophy in one sentence, it's that rewriting is the secret to writing well. The fact is that weak writers and strong writers are almost the same through the first draft. And their first drafts are universally bad. Everybody has bad first drafts. The secret or the key is that weak writers move from the first draft to proofreading, and then they turn it in, because when they get to the end of that first draft, they're like, aha, the writing is done. Strong writers know that when you get to the end of the first draft, now you can start writing. Now the work actually can begin, because you have a draft on paper and you can begin to rewrite it. And that's really where the work happens. So how can you bin the activities that you do during rewriting after that first draft? So I'm going to suggest 3 bins: revision, editing, and proofreading. And this corresponds to the previous slides. Revision is structural editing, okay? And you can envision these 3 things: revision, editing, and proofreading in an inverse triangle. So we're going from big to small. And we're going from like the big parts of the paper to the small parts of the paper, both in terms of ideas and the actual elements of the paper. So what does that mean? In the first bin, revision, we're talking about ideas, thesis, and big ideas, major sections, okay? Are the ideas right in the paper? The fact is that first revision really isn't about anything more than clarifying your thinking. When you do a draft, you put your thinking on paper. When you do the first revision, that thinking is reflected back to you. And you're like, okay, here are my ideas. Are they strong? Often we find out they're not. And so when we engage with that first revision, we often find ourselves going back to research, going back and doing more drafting. And that's normal. Developing writers get frustrated with that because they think I must be a bad writer because my draft sucks. No, everybody's draft sucks. What you're doing is you're using your writing to clarify your thinking. And so going back to research after a first draft, perfectly normal. Okay. So to clarify our ideas, we're focusing on the paper as a whole: introduction, main body, conclusion, major sections, and paragraphs. We want to make sure that all of those things are ordered correctly and they're all advancing the main idea. Once we're happy with our ideas, and equally important, by the way, we're not paying attention to sentences and words and grammar and punctuation, right? Save that for later. That comes later. So part of the writing process is knowing what to focus on at each stage, but also what not to focus on. Don't get kind of caught into fixing periods, you know, and doing edits when you're drafting, when you might end up murdering that darling later on, okay? After you're happy with your ideas, then you're going to go down to editing. So editing deals primarily with clarity. And you're looking, clarity happens at the paragraph, sentence, and word level. So this is where you're looking at things like, do I have long sentences? Do the sentences flow? Am I using, clear language? I'll define clarity for you the way I define it. Clear writing is writing that's easy to read and understand. And that's the main goal of editing, is to make the writing clear. So you'll notice in revision, we're kind of more focused on ourselves and our own thinking. In editing, we're really focused on the reader, and we've clarified our ideas. Now we have to make sure that they're clear to the audience. Let me give you 3 principles or characteristics I think that make writing clear: concise, simple, concrete. Concise. Don't use any more. Use only the number of words that you need to convey the idea, but no more. I'll give you an example that we used the other day in class. Here's a sentence that opens an essay. We need to have a serious conversation about how to reform the Space Force personnel system, right? A more concise version, we need to reform the Space Force personnel system, right? It feels a lot stronger. We don't need to have a serious conversation. We just need to do it. So it's stronger, it's more concrete, more concise. So conciseness. Next thing, simplicity. After you've removed everything that doesn't need to be in there to communicate your idea, simplify what remains to the simplest word possible. So my favorite is utilize. Military people love utilize. And by the way, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, so I include myself in that. Just say use, right? Instead of, I notice you have up here nominalizations, zombie nouns. Instead of make preparations for, just prepare, right? Use very simple words. Now, we shouldn't oversimplify. Sometimes complex ideas require complex language, and that's okay, right? Good writing is true to its ideas. So we don't want to simplify to the point that it obscures our meaning. But usually that's not the problem. Complex language isn't the problem, but often we use complex language needlessly to try to gain credibility with our audience instead of just saying things simply and clearly. One of my favorite people in terms of writing with clarity, his name's Brian Greene. He's a theoretical physicist and a science communicator. He wrote an article in Smithsonian about quantum physics, about this development in quantum physics called the Higgs boson at a 10th grade reading level. And that's pretty impressive, right? To talk about something that complex in a way that if you have a 10th grade education, you can kind of make your way through it. So that he's kind of my hero. I always say if Brian Greene can talk about quantum physics at a 10th grade level, we can probably do better in the Army about talking about doctrine and things like that at a level that most soldiers can understand. Okay, and then the last one with clarity is concreteness. We are visual creatures, right? About 40% of our brain is dedicated directly or indirectly to vision. So when we use words and we use language, our brains try to visualize what we're saying. The closer that we can bring our language to concrete, visualizable ideas, the better we're going to be. So, for example, if I, instead of saying, we are conducting an inquiry with higher headquarters about the possibility of gaining additional resources. If instead of that, we can say we're asking headquarters for more money, where that's going to be a lot simpler, cleaner, more concise, right? Like, the idea of like getting additional resources, what does that mean? I'm not sure. My audience probably have different ideas about what that means, but getting more money, everybody can relate to that. I know exactly what you're talking about because I can visualize that. So simple words tend to be more concrete. So a lot of these things sort of go together. All right. So revision, big things, editing, small things, sentences and words. And then the last thing, grammar, syntax, and punctuation, the tiny things, right? That should be last. And that's always the last thing that I look at.
Yeah.
By the way, the things that you do leading up to that point are going to help. I love the point that you made about short sentences. One of the reasons that we tend to have a lot of grammar and punctuation problems is because we create complex sentence structures that are hard to punctuate and hard to keep verb tense agreement and all those things, right? So if we can be fairly concise with our sentences and simple, then we can, I think, alleviate a lot of those grammar problems. One of the things I would say about grammar too, I think a lot of people get hung up on grammar, and I'm kind of a rebel when it comes to this. My view is that grammar is an enabler. So I think the best way to check for grammar is to read it aloud or have someone read it for you. And if it sounds right, it probably is right. like I'm not an English major. My PhD is in political science, and not English or writing or anything like that. And so I take the view that writing should be very conversational. And if it sounds right, and my litmus test is, can another human being understand this, a reasonably intelligent person? And if they can, it's probably right. I couldn't tell you about like comma rules and all that stuff. I put them in there where there are pauses, right? And then I let Grammarly and Microsoft Editor help me out. But anyway, so that stuff comes last.
Yeah.
So I think if you bin these big to small, revision, editing, proofreading, it kind of gives you a little bit of a structure to make your way through this in the writing process.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's perfect timing, Doctor. You did that like in record time. This was a complex and you made it simple. So, Chief, I know you like to shut these things down, so let's put a bow on and tie this thing up, baby.
Roger that, sir. I think, again, everybody, thanks for being on today. Dr. Lithgow, thanks for sharing all those great ideas and lots to think about. The great thing is this is recorded and accessible on YouTube anytime. So we can go back and fact check and get the information right if we've missed something. I think, sir, episode 8 will be we talked about this May 7th. So check your calendars. Now you had an 8.5 subtly around May 15th. I don't know the secret to crack the code on that one, but May 8th is our next one, sir. So we'll be looking for everybody to be back here at the same guard time, the same guard channel, ready to go.
Right on. All right. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks
Dr.
for having me.
Lithgow.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Y'all take care.